What a strange year this has been. Thank you for joining us today. The Manatee Burying Ground is a historic cemetery that was established on May 30th, 1850. That is 170 years ago. Your tour is about to begin.
What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a cemetery?
They're spooky.
Besides that,
Headstones? They're kind of hard to miss.
actually, some headstones are hard to miss.
What do you mean?
Headstones made of carved marble were a popular trend in the 1800s, but it was also one of the most expensive materials for markers at the time. Much more common, and the reason many graves are now unmarked, was the use of wood. In tropical climates, such as here in Florida, weathering took a quick toll on wooden markers. As time passed and close family members passed away, deteriorated wooden markers were not replaced, leaving the graves unmarked.
So that means if you're taking a walk around the Manatee Burying Ground and you spot a marble headstone, the person buried there was probably from a prominent local family.
Exactly. Notice how Premilia Griffin's burial site is quite elaborate. Her headstone is made of carved marble.
And Premilia was a woman of great wealth, so her family could easily afford her marble headstone.
Tell us some more about Premilia.
Premilia moved to Manatee from Ohio to live with her bachelor son, Joab, in his house near the Manatee River. During the Civil War, her sons were on opposite sides. Joab Griffin was made agent to distribute aid to Confederate soldiers' families, which became all the more needed after Tampa fell to the Union Navy in 1864 and supplies to the area dwindled. His brother, Charles Griffin, held the rank of Major General commanding the Union Army's 5th Corps in Virginia.
Her sons sound like a great example of why the Civil War was called the Brothers' War.
They are. Premilia died in 1857. Since she died before the war, she never had to experience the anxiety of wondering if her family would be forced to meet on the battlefield.
While we've been chatting, I think the audience might have noticed some other things about Premilia's grave.
They probably spotted the fence around her plot.
That is an iron fence, and it is a common feature of historical burials. An iron fence is used to define and protect the grave. Fencing helped deter vandals and helped protect the headstones from being broken or knocked down by wandering animals.
And there would have been a lot of wandering cattle back then.
Why is that?
Well, up until the 1940s, Florida had a no-fence law. This law meant that ranchers were not required to fence their cattle in. Cattle could roam free, making land that was not fenced fair game for their hungry stomachs. If you were a farmer and you didn't want your crops to be eaten by someone else's cows, you were responsible for fencing in your own property.
Isn't there an old photograph of a cow wandering Old Main in downtown Bradenton?
Yes. The photo is part of the Manatee County Public Library's amazing digital collection. Now, back to wandering cattle. They would have been looking for easy grazing. Burying grounds like this made grazing easy because of the cleared land. As they moved around eating the grass, it would have been very easy for them to damage or topple a grave marker. Now I think we all understand why Premilia's grave has a fence around it. The fence would keep her resting place from being damaged by wandering cattle. But what is the point of the lamps on the fence?
Nice observation. Everyone noticed that on Premilia's fence are lit lamps, a common icon found throughout the 1800s. The lamps can signify many things. Among them are undying friendship or the eternal flame of the soul. It may be a metaphor for conquering ignorance or religion banishing evil. Like a candle, it can also represent the flame of life eventually extinguished by death.
As we've been looking around the Manatee Burying Ground, I can't help but notice some strange brick structures scattered throughout the grounds. What are they for?
Those are called barrel vault graves. They were a common burial style throughout the 1800s.
Is there a reason why they were common?
There is. Have you ever heard the phrase 6 feet under?
I have. Back then, it was becoming customary to bury remains 6 feet underground because of new beliefs about contagion and disease resulting from exposure to shallow or poorly dug graves.
And in places like Florida with high water tables, water is often found at a depth of 6 feet or higher. To prevent graves from being exposed or scattered around due to the changing water table levels or flooding caused by the Manatee River, the living sometimes paid for a burial vault for their loved one's final resting place.
So basically, the vaults helped prevent graves from being exposed and the remains from being scattered around or become a source of disease.
Exactly. The burial vaults in the Manatee Burying Ground are all in varying states of preservation. As you see from some of the more weathered examples, some burial vaults are only made of brick. Other burial vaults are multi-layered, constructed using a layer of brick and then coated with cement. The Pillow family plot of graves is an excellent cement burial vault example.
That is a great example. Did you know that James Cooper, John Cooper Pilote, and John Cruz Pilote were all prominent members of the family? James Cooper received a commission as a major general during the Second Seminole War. John Cooper Pilote was James's cousin. John Cooper Pilote served in Florida's Territorial Senate and became a chairman of the Secession Convention. Florida's Secession Convention was a meeting where select people voted if the state would remain in the Union or join the Confederacy. Florida's convention was held on January 3, 1861. A short time later, on January 10th, Florida left the Union and joined the Confederacy. And John Cooper Pilote isn't this family's only connection to the Civil War.
Tell us more!
John Cruz Pilote served as a surgeon for the Confederate Army during the war. He came to Manatee County after the war in 1867. At that time, there was no town doctor, so his expertise was a welcome addition to the community.
Let me make sure I've got all these J names straight. James was a major general during the Second Seminole War?
Correct.
And there are 2 Johns? John Cooper Pilote, who was a chairman of the Secession Convention, and John Cruz Pilote, a doctor that arrived to Manatee County after the Civil War?
You've got it. And now, I've got a question for you. I can't help but notice the grave located across from the Pilote family plot.
Henry Clark's grave?
That's the one. Henry was the first to be laid rest in the Manatee Burying Ground. I've heard his headstone is an elaborate one. Can you tell us more about Henry's headstone?
Sure. His stone is one of the few within the cemetery signed by the carver, an indication that the carver was extremely proud of his work. It is also one of the few stones that notes where it came from. In this case, it came all the way from Potsdam, New York. Notice anything unique about the headstone's design?
I do. The headstone is lying flat. Was that done on purpose?
It was. Originally, Henry's headstone was upright, but it had to be removed from a tree that was growing around it.
Speaking of trees, I think the audience might have noticed the design of oak leaves and acorns on his headstone. What does that mean?
Depictions of oak leaves and acorns symbolize strength, endurance, honor, faith, and virtue.
Looking around the Manatee Burying Ground, there seems to be a lot of nature imagery depicted on the headstones. There was also an interest in ancient Greek culture during this time. Would that have influenced funerary art?
Definitely. Willows appeared frequently in Greek mythology, especially in relation to the underworld and cemeteries. While weeping willows represented mourning, they also often represented immortality. Take a look at the headstone belonging to James Vanderripe.
It seems like trees were a versatile and popular symbol for headstones.
They were. They have been used to represent regeneration, renewal, knowledge, life, and time. A sprouting tree is seen as a new beginning, while stumps are used to symbolize a life cut short. Similarly, broken columns also symbolize the end of a life and are frequently found in older cemeteries.
Thanks for explaining that to us.
No problem. Do you want to see a very uncommon grave here in the Manatee Burying Ground?
Of course.
Take a look at James Helveston's grave. It is another barrel vault grave, but what makes this grave unique is that it has a zinc marker.
Is the zinc what causes the bluish tint on the stone?
Yes. Zinc became popular from 1870 to the early 1900s because of its resistance to corrosion. Over time, exposure to high temperatures could make zinc deform, become brittle, or separate at joints in a permanent deformation called creep. Fortunately, this marker has not suffered any such decay. There is also a design on the back of James's headstone.
Let me guess. Is it more depictions of nature?
It is. Instead of trees, he has the image of a small sheaf of wheat, which often symbolized a long and fruitful life. It could also represent the divine harvest, a reference to God taking his own.
We've explored quite a bit of the Manatee Burying Ground, but we haven't talked much about the land itself.
There are several trees placed near many burial plots here. In the 1800s, people enjoyed planting flowers and even trees to honor the memory of the deceased.
What would people have planted?
Oak and cedar trees, magnolias, palms, ferns, ivy, and many other perennial flowers.
And I bet each living plant has its own symbolism, much like the imagery featured on the gravestones.
Exactly. And in some cases, if individuals could not afford to have a headstone, trees acted as grave markers. Can you tell us how this became the location of the cemetery?
Of course. This burying ground is situated in what was once the village of Manatee. The village was begun in 1842 when Josiah and Mary Gates arrived. They came seeking land under the Armed Occupation Act, which promised free land to any settler who cleared 5 acres, built a house, and lived there for 5 years. It was Josiah and Mary who donated the land for the Manatee Burying Ground.
Did they contribute to the development of the village in any other way?
They did. Over time, they founded a thriving community that attracted other settlers. Not only did they donate the land needed for the cemetery, but they also established the 23-room Gates Hotel and donated the land for the first courthouse. The courthouse was built in 1860, and it is the oldest remaining building built as a courthouse in the entire state of Florida. You can explore the courthouse right here at Manatee Village.
Didn't their son, Josiah Jr., eventually become the mayor of the town of Manatee?
He did. The Gates family is a prominent one in the village of Manatee. In life, they definitely left a lasting impression on the village.
And their burial site leaves quite a lasting impression for visitors.
Tell us more about their burial site.
Their plot has a number of burial traditions.
Vault graves?
Exactly. The vault graves here are similar to the ones in the Pillow plot. The Gates also used cribbing to mark the boundaries of the family plot. Their cribs consist of long stones that outline the boundaries of the plot. The stones used depended on the financial means of the family. Marble, granite, and other material, including concrete, are not uncommon. The use of cribbing continues today and may be found in recent burials.
I think the audience might have noticed another unique feature of the Gates family plot, that large obelisk. Obelisks are ancient symbols, shaped like columns with a pyramid or triangular shape at the top. They were first used in Egypt, so it is interesting to find an example of one here in Manatee County.
Obelisks became popular during the 1800s, following European interest in Egyptology. Here, it is a symbol of rebirth and is connected to the afterlife.
When we take a closer look at the obelisk, it appears to have a Masonic emblem on it.
It does have a Masonic emblem on it. This likely indicates that Josiah Gates was a member of the Freemasons, Fraternal societies, such as the Masons, Woodsmen of the World, and others allowed members to have markers with the order symbol.
Moving on from the Gates family, can you tell us more about that grave closer to the fence line? Does that belong to one of the families buried here?
It does not. That single grave is the burial site of Rev JW Crowder.
Oh, he was the pastor of the 1887 Old Meeting House Church. He died as a result of the yellow fever outbreak that occurred in Manatee during the 1880s.
Notice on the Reverend's gravestone there is an image of an open book, held upright by a hand. As the hand points upward, it could symbolize him passing to his reward. Hands were often showed clasped in prayer, or sometimes grasping another to show friendship. In this case, the hand holds an open book, most likely a Bible.
For any curious audience members, you can explore the 1887 Old Meeting House Church by visiting Manatee Village. For now, let's move on to the next section. Hey, I see another obelisk.
That obelisk belongs to Ezekiel Glacier. His obelisk maintains the tradition of Egyptian revival that was heavily popularized throughout the mid to late 19th century. His obelisk is constructed from marble and features many 19th century funerary imagery. The funerary imagery on Ezekiel's obelisk includes calla lilies, palms, and ivy. Calla lilies represent marriage and fidelity. Palms are a symbol for triumph over death and the resurrection. And ivy is a symbol for memory, immortality, and undying affection.
Like the Gates, Ezekiel is another prominent figure in the village of Manatee.
Tell us more about him.
Ezekiel came to Manatee County from Massachusetts. He was a carpenter and he won the contract to build the first courthouse in Manatee. Remember the 1860 courthouse I mentioned earlier?
Yes, that was built by Ezekiel?
It was. He was awarded a total of $500 to build both a courthouse and a jail.
I don't recall seeing a jail at Manatee Village.
That's because there isn't one. Even though he was paid to build the courthouse and the jail, he only ever built the courthouse. And buildings weren't the only things he made. Ezekiel also crafted coffins as part of his carpentry work, many of which may hold the remains of those resting here. But enough about him. What else do we have to look at?
Did you know that there are Civil War veterans buried here?
I did not.
Have you heard of John Riggin Jr.?
I have. Before the war, John was living in St. Louis, where he operated a successful real estate business. In 1861, at the age of 26, he heeded the call of his country and enlisted in the Army. He served as a colonel and aide-de-camp to Union General Ulysses S. Grant. He was also the head of telegraphs for Grant's army and was responsible for communicating vital information to high-ranking officers and officials. After the war, John was promoted to brigadier general in recognition of his service.
What a career! What brought John to Manatee?
He and his wife, Fanny Mott Hamilton, moved here due to his health issues. The war had left him with a bronchial infection that never seemed to go away, and the cold weather of St. Louis only aggravated his symptoms. Upon the advice of a doctor, they moved to Manatee in 1874. They hoped the warmer climate would improve his health.
What did John and Fanny do once they got here?
He and his wife homesteaded 140 acres. In 1886, John died at the age of 51. Why don't you tell us about his grave? It looks like he has two different markers.
He does. The tall rectangular one is from the time period of his death. The ground level, flat one is a Veterans Administration stone. In the normal course of events, soldiers died and garrison commanders were compelled to bury the dead. A wooden board with a rounded top bearing a registration number or inscription became standard. It would not have met military needs during the Civil War. In 1873, Secretary of War William Belknap adopted the first design for stones in national cemeteries. For the known dead, the department adopted a slab design of marble or durable stone. The part above ground was polished and the top slightly curved. The number of the grave, rank, name of the soldier, and the name of the state were cut on the front face. This original design was referred to as the Civil War type, and was furnished for members of the Union Army only. The stone featured a sunken shield in which the inscription appeared in a bas relief, or a shallow carving.
You said that was done for the known dead. What about the unknown dead?
For the unknown dead, the stone was a block of marble or durable stone, of which the top and 4 inches of the sides of the upper part were finished and the number of the grave cut on the top. On February 3, 1879, Congress authorized furnishing stones for unmarked graves of veterans in private cemeteries. This type of headstone would go on to be furnished for the unmarked graves of other eligible deceased of the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Mexican War, Seminole Wars, and the Spanish-American War.
Wait, back to the Civil War. What about the Confederate dead? Were headstones furnished for them too?
Good question. In 1896, William McKinley, the last Union Army veteran to serve as president, was traveling through Fredericksburg, Virginia, and was troubled to see the untended graves of Confederate soldiers. Following the Spanish-American War, in which Union and Confederate veterans, as well as their sons, fought on the same side for the first time since before the Civil War, McKinley announced the government would begin tending Southern graves. This led to the Congressional Act of March 9, 1906, authorizing the furnishing of headstones for the graves of Confederate soldiers who died primarily in Union prison camps and were buried in federal cemeteries.
What did the Confederate headstones look like?
Congress adopted the same size and material for Confederate headstones as they did for the headstones of the Union and Spanish War. However, there was some variation. For example, the top was pointed instead of rounded, and the shield was omitted. It has been said that the pointed top was adopted to prevent people from sitting on Confederate headstones. An act on February 26, 1929, authorized the furnishing of this type of stone for graves in private cemeteries as well. The Veterans Administration continues to provide markers upon request for all American veterans.
I think that is about all of the information I can absorb today. We've all learned a lot.
We have! Historic cemeteries can help us learn so much about a community.
Well, we can find out a lot of information about the individuals buried in them through the documents they left behind. Even more can be learned from burial patterns and headstones.
Marker materials and decorations teach us about an individual's status, as well as the beliefs of the people of that time period.
Additionally, cemeteries can help us learn about funerary tray patterns, the history of mass production, traditions, local businesses, and the United States as a whole.
For these reasons, the 1850 Manatee Burying Ground and other historic burying grounds like it act as museums in their own right and provide a backdrop to learn about people in our community in the 1800s.
And on that note, we've reached the end of today's digital tour of the 1850 Manatee Burying Ground. Now let's return to Manatee Village.